This is your host Naim bin Muhammad Rafi, and here is my YouTube channel, Zamir Universe. I think after seeing all this cruelty and all this what has been happening to the Gaza residents, the Palestinians, our Muslim brothers and sisters, and looking at the helplessness of 57 Islamic countries, one wonders now that why is it that God has abandoned us? It's our fault. And without firing a bullet, when there is a precedent that the same Jews, same people who were much stronger at the time, and I'm talking of the Jews of Khyber, outside skirts of Medina, at the moment when you go, and many of you must have visited the Khyber Pass, still there are ruins available for you to see. And I'm going to show you this, that how without firing that, when in 1443 years ago, when the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he used the economic weapon, and he asked that destroy all the date trees and look after all those things, boycott what these Jews of Khyber make money from, and with that they buy bow and arrow, and then they shoot us from the top of the mountain. And that was an ironclad security, because they were high up there and the Muslims were just being sitting ducks and were being beaten up and killed. That social boycott and that economic boycott just abandoned them, and they themselves came down begging that can we just leave this place, because we can't make our two ends meet. There is no bread and butter for us. There is nothing for us to do in economies and make money and suck your blood like vampire, as the present Jews are doing all across the world. Everything they own, from Starbucks to the water of Nestle which comes into your house, to Pepsi Cola, to Kentucky Fried Chicken, to McDonald's, etc., etc. And I'll show you the number. You can see with the technology that even a youngster says that there is now an application which you can put on your mobile phone, and everybody has a mobile phone now. Even our sweepers will have a mobile phone. So if you really are determined to fight these Jews, it is not just only that you have aircrafts and you have bombs and you have missiles and you have drones. You have a weapon in your hand, and then use it. And use it, and then listen to the commentary in Urdu about what our Holy Prophet did, and boycott their products. Then you are going to beat, no matter this mentally retarded Netanyahu is adamant, he is stubborn, he is like a mule. So we can see that a person who is not mentally stable, who is full of hatred, for him to have blood on his hands, and then his stepfather, this Sleepy Joe, the America, who is the greatest terrorist of the world, you're not going to beat them, because you've been sleeping hundreds and hundreds of years in technology and not doing anything to compete with them. But you can do that. You still have a tool in your hand, and you can defeat them. You can let them come begging, and that we learn to leave voluntarily Palestine, because there is nothing here. We can't make anything. No technology. They already are, I think.
Now, what did the Jews do? When you ask what have the Germans done to the Jews, you must always ask what have done the Jews to the Germans. Since 1850, when the Jews got all the political rights in Germany, in the German Reich, they have done three things which are really dramatic. Number one, they were a small minority of 2% of the population. At the time when Hitler came to power, 500,000 within 60 million German people. 500,000 among 60 million. They were a small minority. This small minority managed to control about 50% of the media, to give about 70% of all judges, to have a tremendous influence in movie and in theater and in literature. They were overrepresented. This is one thing. They were absolutely overrepresented, as today in England, in France, and in the United States. Second, Jews were at the origin of a lot of catastrophic financial bank crashes in Germany between 1870 and 1920. In that time, they made a lot of crashes which have, this is all documented. I mean, it's not Nazi propaganda or anti-Semitic or Arab propaganda. It's a lot of books have been published, even by Jewish Germans, about this problem. They have millions of German fathers have lost their incomes, their fortune, their savings because of these Jewish gangsters, bank gangsters and speculations people. Then the third point, which was psychologically the most dangerous of all, they have introduced into German art and culture and theater and movie decadence, immorality. The first homosexual theaters, plays, were made in Berlin in the 1920s. The first adultery theater plays were made in the 1880s and 1890s, 100 years ago, by Jewish authors. Adultery, then sexual perversions of all sorts, sadism, masochism, a lot of homosexuality, all these things, and then decadent art, you know, an art which is absolutely ridiculous, so-called modern art. It was all pushed by Jewish intellectuals, and this created among the German people a big revolt. And they wrote books ridiculing Christianity, ridiculing Jesus. I mean, it was something like Salman Rushdie with the Muslims. And they were furious.
Dear citizens of America, here's some stuff that you really need to know. First of all, Jews make up less than 2% of the population of your country, but they hold every senior level cabinet position in the Biden administration except Secretary of Defense. I mean, just look at this list. And you have to ask yourself, are these people after your best interests? Are they going to do what's best for America, or are they going to do what's best for Israel? You see, the whole world knows the reality that Israel treats America like a farm. They treat you guys like cattle, like farm animals. Every single hardworking American works every day and pays their taxes. Those taxes are supposed to go to improving America and making the country better for you and your children. But instead, that money is sent overseas to Israel. America gives more aid to Israel than any other country. In 1999, the US government signed an MOU saying that they were going to pay a minimum of $2.67 billion annually for Israel for the next 10 years. That number was increased in 2009 and increased again in 2019, and now as a minimum, Israel gets $3.8 billion from the US every single year. That's $3.8 billion a year of your money, your tax money, that should be providing you with health care, should be providing you with a college education, but is not doing any of those things. Now, in addition to financial and military aid, the US also provides a lot of political support to Israel, as we've all seen. It used its veto power 42 times against resolutions condemning Israel. Now, the veto power was used a total of 83 times. 42 of those were used to protect Israel. That's more than half. So if I was an American, I would be asking myself, why am I living on this farm? Why am I allowing myself to work and sweat for my entire lifetime, as well as everyone I know and love, as well as all my children, just to send all of this money and support away to Israel?
Here for the next map. Put the rivers on immediately.
I had some surveys made in this part of the world when I was President of the United States. This Dead Sea Valley is far below the Mediterranean Sea Valley, several hundred feet. My idea was to get a siphon from the Mediterranean Sea to the Dead Sea Valley, because after you got the water started through that siphon, we'd say 100 yards wide, the water itself would do its own pumping. You wouldn't have to pump it. It would run just exactly like a siphon, because this end of it would be far below the Mediterranean Sea. And of course, that's an inexhaustible source of water, but it's only fit for power. It's salt water. Then I had a survey made of the Tigris and the Euphrates valleys with the idea of finding out whether they were still a potential place for the settlement of people. When that survey was made, it was discovered that some of the old canals were still there, that were there in the time of Nineveh and Babylon, and that if those rivers were again put to work as they were in the time of the great population of Babylon and Nineveh, they'd support at least 3 million or 4 million people, just as they did in the time of Nineveh and Babylon. And that in that way, you'd put all this country here to be into production instead of letting it go to pot. You could not very well economically get the Tigris, the Euphrates Valley into Israel because there's a great hump here over which it wouldn't go. But you can take the Mediterranean Sea over that hump and let it fall into the Dead Sea, and it'll do its own pumping. That was what I had in mind. And that survey was made by the Tennessee Valley Authority, and the report of it's in my file yet.
This is a complex situation. It's 75 years ago. There is a statute of limitations on things like this, a moral statute of limitations. Move on. Establish yourselves in the countries that you left and went to. Get rid of these refugee camps. Get rid of UNRWA and become full citizens of the countries you moved to, the way my grandparents became full citizens of the United States
let me go
after pogroms had made them leave Poland.
Okay, come to Norman Finkelstein. Your response to that?
Okay, thank you, Piers. First of all, as a general point, I agree with the notion of a statute of limitations on your claims to a parcel of land. The first time I came across that expression was reading Arnold Toynbee's great history of the world, actually. And he makes the point in his history that isn't there a statute of limitation on the claims of Jews to Palestine? He said that claim was made 2,000 years ago. And it's claimed that, even today it's claimed that, based on what happened 2,000 years ago, there's a large portion of Israeli population who believes they have title to the West Bank, they have title to Gaza, because of that claim 2,000 years ago. Isn't there a statute of limitations? Allow me to complete my thought, and then you can disagree. Isn't there a statute of limitations on the claim from 2,000 to 3,000 years ago?
I have never been so ashamed of Israel as I am at this moment. To me, it seems as if Hitler has won. He's changed us, Jews, from being compassionate and caring and do unto others as you would have them do unto you, into this vicious, genocidal, nationalist nation, pursuing and killing women and children. What we are doing, Jewish people, over in Israel is shocking, embarrassing, and wicked. And in the name of humanity, I call upon all Jews to shout, beg, scream for a ceasefire. It is not anti-Semitic to have a different opinion on the wartime actions now.
And then you've got the Israeli army, which I like to refer to as one of the best trained, best equipped, best fed terrorist organizations in the world. And yes, they have generals and they have nice uniforms, but their entire purpose is terrorism. And just as one example, I'll give you one example. Almost exactly 4 years ago, as Israel began its attack on Gaza, September the 27th, 2008, at 11:25 in the morning, what I refer to as the most shameful day in the Jewish history, the most shameful day in the history of the Jewish people. Israel began carpet bombing Gaza, and on the first day of what was to be a 21-day attack, they dropped 100 tons of bombs. Okay, a 1-ton bomb will decimate an entire city block. Gaza is one of the most densely populated places in the world. 800,000 children live in Gaza. 11:25 is exactly the time when the morning school shift and the afternoon school shift change. So all the kids are in the streets. All the children are on the streets. That was the moment decided by the decision makers in Israel to begin the attack.
If you could address them, what would be your message to the Israeli people?
You know, in the Muslim and the Arab world, we sort of have been taking it as a truism, you know, for years, that the United States basically serves Israel, that America is controlled by Zionists, and that the U.S. government will do anything, no matter how much it costs, to save and protect Israel. I think there's a lot of Israelis who probably think that way too. But an objective rational assessment of the situation would paint a very different picture. I think Israelis need to recognize, if they don't already, that the United States is not your savior. It's your worst enemy. The U.S., whether you know it or not, and whether Muslims understand it or not, is actually treating Israel the same way that they treat everyone else, with complete contempt. I mean, look, they are supporting Benjamin Netanyahu, who is the most unpopular, the most despised, the most corrupt, the most incompetent, the most psychopathic, delusional, and despotic ruler that Israel has ever had. And he's responsible for both prolonging and worsening the conflict with the Palestinians. Netanyahu has made a career on diverting attention away from the internal domestic concerns that actually matter to Israeli citizens, that matter the most to Israeli citizens, by endlessly talking about security and the supposed threat that Israel faces. And of course, the domestic problems in Israel just get worse. And the conflict and the security situation actually just gets worse. And America loves it. They don't care about Israel's domestic issues. They don't care about the socioeconomic issues, the socioeconomic concerns that Israelis have, the high cost of living, the disparity between rich and poor. They don't care about corruption in Israeli society, and so on. And these are the predominantly these are the issues that matter the most to Israeli citizens, to Israeli voters. But as far as America is concerned, the only thing that matters is continuing the strife and conflict. That's all they care about. They don't care about the welfare and the stability of Israel, the safety of Israeli citizens. You see, Israeli citizens want to treat Israel like an actual country, and they expect it to behave like an actual country. And they think that their lives and their concerns should matter like they would in an actual country. But to the United States, Israel is a policy instrument. So the Israeli population doesn't matter to them. And what matters to the Israeli population doesn't matter to them. The relationship with the United States has been incredibly detrimental to Israel, despite what everyone thinks. It has prevented Israel from becoming a normal society. Now, part of that is driven by diaspora Jews in the U.S., who, like most diaspora communities, are generally far more radical and ideological than their people back home. And this diaspora community in the West, particularly in the United States, makes a huge amount of money exploiting Jewish emotional attachment to Israel, getting them to fund pro-Israeli lobbies and so on, which mostly just makes a handful of American Jews very rich. But it's mostly driven by U.S. policy interests and the utility of Israel as a vehicle for an endless flow of cash to American defense companies, and as an sort of offshore research and development hub for the Pentagon. The U.S. does not want, and has never wanted, for Israel to be at peace with their neighbors. They've never wanted Israel to integrate into the region. That's not Israel's function as far as America is concerned. It doesn't matter to them that this is the only way for Israel to ever actually become a normal society. It doesn't matter if this is in the interests of the Israeli population or not. They don't care. They're using you. They're using you, the Israelis. They're exploiting you. The Americans, the West, are using you. And it's absolutely against the interests of your people. Obviously, the only way for Israel to ever progress as a society is to dislodge themselves from the United States, from the West, and to integrate properly into the region. Until they do that, none of their domestic issues will ever be resolved. They'll never even be addressed. Until they do that, they will never be allowed to do anything but be a policy tool of the U.S. and lose both their lives and their souls in the process. I mean, they're making you do things that are against your beliefs as Jews. They're making you do things that are against your own humanity. They're pushing you to do things that make the world see you as monsters, And more specifically, you're being seen as monsters by the people who are in that part of the world where you are. Properly, Israel should be a global South country. It should be a Middle Eastern country, and it should share the values and the priorities of the global South and the Middle East. But because it was a Western colonialist project from the beginning, and because it continues to operate exclusively as a colonialist project, it is seen as, it is perceived as, and it sees itself as a Western nation. And you're never going to be able to be a normal country going forward like that. The only real way forward is a one-state solution. Incorporate all of the occupied territories and all of the inhabitants of those territories into one country with equal citizenship rights. Yes, that will mean that Israel will have a Palestinian majority and it will no longer be a so-called Jewish state, but it can become a normal, healthy society. I mean, if Zionism means upholding the right of Jews to live in Palestine, well, no one ever said they didn't have that right. No one ever had a problem with that, certainly not the Muslims. But if Zionism means ethnic Jewish supremacy, well, I mean, what civilized person would endorse something like that in the 21st century? There were always Jews in Palestine during the Muslim Empire. And there were Jews in Palestine when the Zionists came, and the Zionists fought against them. But if you want your country to ever be normal, then you're going to have to go back in history and learn from the history of those Palestinian Jews who knew how to get along with their neighbors and who lived peacefully with the Arabs, who lived peacefully with the Palestinians. The Jews who rightly saw the Zionists as colonizers and as people who disrupted their society, because those same Zionists and that same ideology is disrupting your society today. The Israelis can't possibly like being the way their country is now. There's no way they like that. They're human beings. They hate Netanyahu, and most of them blame the government for what's going on right now, and rightly so. But look how
बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम अस्सलाम वालेकुम। हकीकत टीवी साइंस एंड हेल्थ में खुश आमदीद। क्या दौर आ गया है, किस लेवल पर हम जी रहे हैं। ईरान ने हमला क्या किया, सारे परखच्चे उड़ गए, और कमाल की बात है कैसे घुटनों में गिरे हैं इस वक्त दुनिया के अंदर सारे तमाशा बनने वाले अमरीकी और इजरायली। हुआ ये है कि अमरीका ने स्विट्जरलैंड के एम्बेसडर के थ्रू पैगाम भेजा है जो तेहरान में मौजूद हैं। वो गए और जाकर ईरानी ऑफिशियल से उन्होंने की मुलाकात। उनको जाकर कहा कि देखिए, अब इस सूरत हाल को हम नहीं चाहते कि ईरान और इसराइल की जंग हो जाए और पूरा खित्ता उसकी लपेट में आ जाए। तो आप एक छोटा सा काम कर लें, आप एक जगह हमें बता दें, ईरान की उस जगह के ऊपर इसराइल के तैयारे आएंगे F-35 और दीगर, वो आकर स्ट्राइक करेंगे, हमला करेंगे, और लिमिटेड सा होगा। यानी आप पहले से ही बता दें कहाँ कहाँ करना है स्ट्राइक, वो जगह हमें बता दें, वहाँ पर इजरायली आएंगे, ईरान में हमला करेंगे, वापस चले जाएंगे, और ये लिमिटेड सा होगा। तो उसमें आपका कोई जानी नुकसान नहीं होगा। सिर्फ एक दो जो आपकी मिलिट्री इंस्टॉलेशन है, जो आप समझते हैं कि बिल्कुल कबूल नहीं है, वो कर दें, और इस सूरत हाल के अंदर काफ़ी सारे मामला आपके हल कर दिए जाएंगे। यानी कुछ रिलैक्सेशन भी हो जाएगी आपको पाबंदियों के हवाले से। हम चाहेंगे कि उसके बाद हम एक ऐसा बयानिया जारी कर देंगे कि जिसमें हम कहेंगे कि अब ईरान हमला ना करे, हम ईरान से कुछ पाबंदियां हटा देंगे, हम चाहते हैं ट्रेड हो, खित्ता आगे चले, बड़े, और ये तमाम चीज़ें हों। तो आप ये काम कर दें और यानी फ्रेंडली मैच है, खेलें और ये मामला सामने आ जाए। अब सुनिए ज़रा ईरान ने आगे जवाब क्या दिया। देखिए, आप एक बात बताइए, ईरान ने जो काम किया है 75 साल में इसराइल में किसी की जुर्रत है, ये इतने इस्लामिक मुल्क है, इतनी बड़ी फौजी एयरफोर्स है, किसी की जुर्रत रही है इसराइल पर ऐसा स्ट्राइक करने की। अब आगे से जरा ईरान देखिए, ईरान क्या कर सकता है। ईरान ने तो अपना काम कर दिया, दुनिया ने उसकी ताकत देख ली। तो वो चाहता तो ये कह देता कि ठीक है जी, पाबंदियां अगर हटती हैं कुछ और मामला हल होते हैं तो कर लें। उन्होंने आगे से क्या जवाब दिया? उन्होंने कहा कि अगर इजराइल के तैयारे, हमारी सरहद तो बड़ी दूर की बात है, हमारे एरिया से गुजरेंगे भी तो हम उनके टुकड़े टुकड़े करके नुमाइश के लिए पेश कर देंगे उन्हें कि आप हमारी सरहद में घुसने की कोशिश करें। हम उसके बाद इसराइल पर ऐसा हमला करेंगे कि पूरी दुनिया लरज उठेगी। जंग तो बड़ी दूर की बात है, पूरी दुनिया इस वक्त कांप उठेगी जो हम इसराइल का हाल करेंगे। اور جو ہمارا جواب ہوگا وہ اتنا خطرناک ہوگا، اتنا خطرناک ہوگا، اتنے ہم میزائل ماریں گے کہ آپ لوگ گنتے گنتے تھک جائیں گے، اتنی بارش ہو جائے گی، اور ہمارا جو جواب ہوگا وہ کم از کم 10 گنا بڑا ہوگا. اور اگر امریکہ اور برطانیہ یہ کسی نے بھی فیسیلیٹیٹ کرنے کی کوشش کی، ہمارے ملک میں آ کر حملہ کروانے کی کوشش کی، تو ہم ان کو ایسا سبق سکھائیں گے کہ وہ پناہ مانگتے پھریں گے دوبارہ مڈل ایسٹ اپنے فوجی اڈے بنانے سے. آپ اندازہ کر سکتے ہیں ایران کا یہ جواب. ابھی تو یہ معاملہ یہاں پر رکا ہے. 7 فیسیلیٹیز کیا انہوں نے دی تھی؟ انہوں نے 7 فیسیلیٹیز یہ دی ہیں کہ ہم لوگ بات چیت کریں گے، پھر غزہ سے، یعنی آپ اگر یہ معاملہ کریں تو پھر ہم اسرائیل سے معاملہ طے کر کے یہ جنگ رکوانے کی کوشش کریں گے. اصل میں یہ بہت بڑا ٹریپ تھا، اتنا بڑا ٹریپ تھا، اتنا بڑا ٹریپ تھا کہ آپ سوچ بھی نہیں سکتے. ایران کو دانا ڈالا، کیونکہ دیکھیں ایران نے آگے کرنا ہے جواب. انہوں نے کہا بھئی آپ بس جواب نہیں دینا، اور ہم یہ کریں گے کہ جی دونوں پارٹیز نے ٹھیک ہے جی، جیسے پاکستان اور ایران کا معاملہ ہوا تھا تو ایران بھی بیٹھا، یہ بھی بیٹھا، سارے بیٹھے تو بات چیت حل ہوگی، مسئلہ حل ہو گیا. تو چلے کوئی بات نہیں، آپ بھی یہاں پر بیٹھے بات چیت کریں اور یہ سارے کا سارا مسئلہ حل کر دیں. اب یعنی پاکستان نے حملہ کیا، ایران نے حملہ کیا، اسی طرح کا طرز ہو جائے کہ چلو جی دونوں کا حساب کتاب برابر ہو گیا. لیکن اس ساری صورتحال میں ایران نے کہا اب ہماری سرزمین میں گھسیں گے، دوبارہ گھسنے کے قابل نہیں چھوڑیں گے. دیکھیں حالات یہاں پر پہنچ چکے ہیں کہ امریکہ اس وقت پریشان ہے، کیونکہ ایران کے اوپر حملے کے لیے اسرائیل ہے بضد. طیارے پہنچ چکے ہیں، برطانیہ کے ہو، امریکہ کے ہو، فرانس کے ہو، ان سب کے طیارے اس وقت اسرائیل میں پہنچے. اور پرابلم سب سے بڑی یہ ہے کہ ان کو سمجھ نہیں آ پا رہی کہ ہم نے اب کرنا کیا ہے. دیکھیں اگر ایران اس ٹریپ میں آ جاتا ہے تو جانتے ہیں آپ اسرائیل کیا کرے گا؟ اسرائیل ان کی نیوکلیئر فیسلٹیز تباہ کر دے گا. آپ دنیا میں سارے ملکوں پر بھروسہ کر سکتے ہیں، اگر نہیں کسی پر کر سکتے تو آپ اسرائیل پر بھروسہ نہیں کر سکتے، جنہوں نے 76 سال سے پوری دنیا کو یہ جھوٹ بولا ہوا ہے کہ جی وہ ہمارا تو یہ زمین کا لینڈ کا ٹکڑا ہی ہمارا تھا، یہ تو تھا. وہ ساری دنیا کو جھوٹ بولتے آ رہے ہیں اور پوری دنیا کو انہوں نے نچایا ہوا ہے، پاگل کیا ہوا ہے. تو آپ اندازہ کر لیں کہ انہوں نے کہا کہ آپ مکمکا کر لیں، ایک ایسا حملہ کر لیں جو صرف دکھانے کے لیے اور ساتھ اسے اسرائیل کی فیس سیونگ ہو جائے. اصل میں وہ یہ چاہتے ہیں، اور انہوں نے آگے سے ان کو منہ توڑ جواب دیا ہے. اب اصل میں صورتحال یہ ہے کہ ایران پوری طرح تیار ہے، ایران حملے کے لیے تیار ہے، ایران ان پر پوری طرح برسات کرنے کے لیے تیار ہے. اور سب سے بڑھ کر بات یہ ہے، پیوٹن نے کال کی ہے ابراہیم ریسی کو. سب سے بڑی ڈیولپمنٹ ہوئی ہے، پیوٹن نے کال کی ہے ایران کے پریزیڈنٹ کو، اور اس کال کے اندر آپ جانتے ہیں کہ سب سے زیادہ اہم ترین معاملہ کیا ہوا ہے کہ ابراہیم ریسی جو ایران کے پریزیڈنٹ ہے، انہوں نے کہا ہے کہ اگر ہم پر حملہ، یہ سوچیں ذرا، دونوں چیزوں کو آپ کنیکٹ کریں. امریکہ پہلے یہ بات کہتا ہے اور اس بات کے بعد پھر پیوٹن کی کال آتی، یعنی وہ روس کو آگاہ کرے ایک چیز کا. روس نے کال کی. اب یہ چاہتے تو یہ خبر باہر نہ آتی، وہ صرف کہتے جی بات چیت ہوئی ہے، دونوں نے اتفاق کیا ہے، تعلقات آگے بڑھنے دے، جو ایک رینڈملی چیز ہوتی. انہوں نے اس بات میں کہا کہ روس کے صدر کو ایران نے یہ کہا ہے اگر کوئی ایکشن ہوا ایران کے خلاف تو ایران اس کا اتنا جواب دے گا تگڑا کہ درد ختم نہیں ہوگی، پینفل وے میں جواب دے گا اسرائیل کو، امریکہ کو اور باقی طاقتوں کو.
یونیورسل ٹیلی ویژن کو سبسکرائب کرنا نہ بھولیں، اس کے بعد بیل بٹن پہ کلک کریں اور اپنے کامنٹس کے سیکشن میں اپنے قیمتی جو خیالات کا اظہار ضرور